I sure hope you're ready to fly because Sony will be bringing 2 more PlayStation 2 classics to their PlayStation Plus subscription service. Next week, we'll see 2 very different aerial combat games, SkyGunner and Mister Mosquito. Yeah, that's exciting news, but are either of these 2 games actually worth playing? To answer that question, I decided to flip through the pages of Electronic Gaming Monthly, Edge, Game Informer, and more classic magazines to see what the critics said back when these games first came out. Get ready to take to the sky and suck some blood in this brand new episode of PlayStation Plus Review Crew. Once the exclusive domain of computers, aerial combat games started to take off on consoles as the hardware allowed for better 3D effects and more realistic dogfights. This led to some genuinely amazing shootouts in space, along with the more grounded Ace Combat series from Namco. Look, those games are great, but what if you're looking for an aerial combat game with a slightly broader appeal? Something with more colorful graphics and cutesy characters. If that's the thing that's been keeping you away from the genre, then let me tell you, SkyGunner is for you. It's an exciting 3D shooter that is set in a more fantastical world, complete with over-the-top characters and cool airplane designs. But longtime fans of the review crew already know that the critics are a little iffy when it comes to cutesy games. So, will SkyGunner be an exception? As is so often the case, the answer to that question depends entirely on who you ask. Electronic Gaming Monthly, for example, gave it an average score of 8.3 out of 10, which was good enough to earn their Silver Award. I think that Milkman actually summed it up perfectly. If you've ever wondered what it would feel like to be Snoopy and chase the Red Baron out of the sky, SkyGunner will put that curiosity to rest. Boasting some of the most inspired aesthetics since Panzer Dragoon, SkyGunner conjures a sense of flight and freedom so convincing, you'll want to nosedive out of the sun into the enemy's blind spot just because you can. Jonathan also liked the game, arguing that it's the closest to a 2D shooter turned 3D, and that rocks. The game has you gunning down formations of tiny solo fighters and huge flying fortresses alike. SkyGunner's got an inexcusable slowdown problem, but is otherwise good, clean fun. Now, while EGM may have liked SkyGunner, it's unfortunately all downhill from here. You saw the official US PlayStation magazine give the game a much lower 3.5 out of 5, which is more or less in line with what PSM gave it in their 61st issue. Giving it a 7 out of 10, David Smith argued that at times the life and dynamism of SkyGunner's aerial battles proved to be downright breathtaking. Squadrons of fighters swirl around gigantic flying battleships and spray fire in every direction. And yet the target-focused camera keeps things reasonably clear and easy to follow. The downside is when the engine undergoes a near collapse and drops down to 5 frames per second. This isn't a frequent occurrence, but it's more frequent than it ought to be. The 30 frames per second mode tidies this up, but it also spoils some of the fun of when the game runs smoothly. Be aware that SkyGunner has problems, but give it a try and see if it grabs the shooter fan in you. As we continue our descent down the rating scale, you see Game Informer going a bit lower, giving the game an average of 6.5 out of 10. However, the lowest score comes from Edge, who went even lower, giving SkyGunner a 6. What should have been a spectacular shoot-'em-up played straight gets badly wounded by occasional attacks of irredeemable slowdown. This isn't how a game based on instinct should work. Players should never find themselves caught in 30 seconds of freeze frame, especially when said moments have the screen resolution and reduce the image quality to N64 levels. If you can forgive that, you'll find that SkyGunner works well because it's slick, satisfying, and as shallow as a game based around score attack needs to be. It's not as thrilling as it sounds, or indeed as it ought to be. But, shocking stop motion aside, it's an interesting attempt at Galaga 3D. Yeah, this is one of those situations where everybody agrees on what the problem is. In this case, it's the performance and the PlayStation 2 not being able to keep up with the action. Really, the difference in scores comes down to just how much you're able to overlook the lingering problem. Let's hope that some of these performance issues have been cleaned up on the newer hardware. Mr. Mosquito is one of those weird little Japanese oddities that in previous years would have stayed in Japan, but not in 2002. With the PlayStation 2 flying off of store shelves, IDOS bet big that some of these quirky titles might actually be weird enough to get some magazine exposure and, who knows, earn a cult following or something. This led to the release of Mr. Mosquito, a charming game where you fly around and suck blood without being swatted away. Although it's a fairly straightforward premise that doesn't actually seem that hard to get behind, especially when compared to the weird titles that come out these days, this was deemed by both critics and consumers as one of the weirdest games of all time. Weird? Sure, I guess. But did the critics like it? That's the real question. Let's go ahead and start with the lowest score, which once again comes from Edge. Giving it a 5 out of 10, Edge sums up Mr. Mosquito this way. The thing that really breaks Mr. Mosquito, or at least stops it from being the success and idea like this warrants, is the right-angled difficulty curve. There are 12 levels, and 1 to 10 are far too simple. Then 11 hits, the father starts throwing Hadouken-style fireballs, and your mosquito's aflame within seconds. Fine, but there's no instant restart, and the PlayStation 2's cancerous loading times eat away at the game so much that finding the enthusiasm to conquer that single challenging moment is difficult. That's a shame, because Mr. Mosquito's blood-pumping uniqueness means that it's bound to attract some bug-eyed gamers. They'll bite down on the rich vein of originality, but then they'll probably leave unsatisfied. It's worth mentioning that fellow UK magazine Computer and Video Games liked the game a little bit more, giving it a 6 out of 10. Electronic Gaming Monthly, on the other hand, went a half a point higher. It's true, Mr. Mosquito is an ugly little fella. The blocky, drab graphics look more like one of the weakest PlayStation 2 launch games than most newer titles. But consider this. How many games involve you stalking an innocent Japanese family, all from the point of view of a nasty little insect? That's what makes this Mr. Mosquito worthwhile. For some of us, anyway. The sheer novelty and, well, just the weirdness of it all. And make no mistake, this game taps that bizarro vein and it sucks it dry with funny voice acting and quirky characters. Mr. Mosquito is definitely flawed. But if you were curious enough to read this whole review, chances are the concept alone is worth a bite. Now, aside from Entertainment Weekly, which gave the game a B, pretty much every other critic was in the 70% range. For example, GamePro went with a 3.5 out of 5, while PSM went with a 7 out of 10. And that's the exact same score that you saw over at Game Informer, who concluded that there's gold in them there hills, so dive in! Japanophiles will undoubtedly love this game, but the rest will need a little more convincing before buying Mr. Mosquito. The gameplay of being a mosquito doesn't surprise or challenge, but there is something to be said for this title due to its pure outrageousness. After all, even a mosquito bite sticks around for a while, and I think you'll want to satiate your itchy curiosity. However, as the game says, get your fill, but don't get too bloated. It'll be interesting to revisit Mr. Mosquito more than 2 decades later, especially considering that the reviews at the time were already complaining about the outdated graphics. This is one of those good ideas that doesn't fully come together, but it's still worth playing anyway.
間抜けなやつだ。 僕なら今のは買わせる。
僕なら
僕は蚊だから。
そう、じゃあ来てごらん。ほれ。
この夏蚊になる蚊。
卑怯だ。
PlayStation.
Hey, thanks for watching me break down these classic reviews. If you liked what you saw here, then you should know that we post new shows every time classic games get added to modern consoles. We have a whole playlist full of episodes just like this one, so check it out when you have a few minutes to kill. Now, here's the question I have for you. What's your favorite flying game? It doesn't have to be an action game, just as long as it has something to do with flying. Let me see your picks in the comments below. In other news, we'll be back next week with more reviews, and hopefully Nintendo will announce something for the review crew. We're going on 6 weeks since an announcement, people! While you wait for that, I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then,